Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Today is the 14th day of June. It is 2022, the year of our Lord. It is about 8 o'clock in the morning down here in a mostly sunny and 76-degree Tampa, Florida. Hi, I am Scott. Bo is taking a nap down below. Today we're going to talk about the significance of the date of September 11th. What does it mean? Why was it chosen? What does it foreshadow? But before we do, a little housekeeping. All you guys who have been followers of mine and have helped me in many ways over the years, I certainly appreciate it. And no, that does not mean I am getting ready to say bye-bye. That means I am getting ready to say I'm kind of going all in. I've made purchases over the last 48 hours. And you will see some of those changes pretty quickly here to the quality of what I'm doing. And that's going to continue. Lifestyle choices have resulted in a number of positive results. And hopefully, slowly but surely, they will be manifesting themselves in what you see here on a regular basis. And I'm again hoping that everything works out. So I'm not going to talk about any of it specifically, but you will notice hopefully tomorrow changes. Also, automobile parts have been ordered. They are being shipped from Malaysia. So, sticking with the lesson that I learned last time, I'm not going to have anyone else do it, even my well-meaning neighbor across the street. So I have also purchased the tools and the material that will be required. And we'll practice a bit before I actually do the work on the particular part that is on its way. So, just so you know, big doings. It doesn't look like a whole lot, but big doings right now for this site. And again, none of it's possible without you guys, and I very much appreciate it. Let's move on. Just so you know, I don't know why I'm showing you this, but there it is. Today's video is going to go up on Botender. If you're not a subscriber there, I don't know why. You can also watch my war crimes videos, Dishonored 2, where I just kill everybody. Because, yes, I'm not very good at fucking stealth, and I panic and just decide to hell, kill everybody. And then when the villagers or the civilians try running away, well, you can't leave fucking witnesses. So they got to go to. So I'm doing a whole war crime series of Dishonored 2 if you want to go watch it. BitChute. This is my BitChute channel, and it's picking up subscribers slowly but surely, and I'm very happy. I don't know why you guys haven't told me how wonderful my Photoshop skills are from that. The comment section is right down there below. And you also have the Substack, which you can join if you like. I think I have about 116 subscribers now, and I'm very excited about that. Thank you all very much. Currently, I'm still just posting up archived stuff that was wiped out by was on my WordPress channel, but it was wiped out back in 2017, 2018. And I was lucky enough that some of it was archived, and I have access to it. So I'm posting up some old stuff. There's a podcast here, but I haven't done it yet. But I have set it up. So I do have, all I got to do is go in here to dashboard and click on podcast, and I can record a podcast for it and set it up. So that is coming as well. Big doings. Lots of big doings. Let's talk about September 11th. What does September 11th mean? I'm going to talk about specifically 5 dates, which I believe are key to the choice of what day the attacks of September 11th, 2001 took place. What they mean, what they symbolize, why the choice was made. Now, some will say, Scott, that's just making the case for the angry Muslims did it. And you will see in an article, they lay out all of this stuff on September 11th from Foreign Policy magazine. In the end, they say, see, that's why the angry Muslims did it. Okay, you can come to that conclusion if you wish. However, I counter with this.
No tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11th.
You will notice that the shed on the top that housed the equipment for the elevators and air conditioning and things like that, that collapses first. Why? Because inside this shell, all of the superstructure is collapsing in on itself. All of it. This is what's called a bottom-up demolition. And when you do a bottom-up demolition, you have to pull it so that it doesn't lean over and take out this building and lean over and take out that building. It has to go straight down, watch this point and watch that point, into its own footprint, pulling the exterior walls into the pile. This is a perfect example of a bottom-up controlled demolition. The reason the top buildings and apparatus disappear is because the core of it is collapsing. And as the core of it collapses, it's pulling the sides, which are trying to remain up, it's pulling them in.
Building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire.
But
that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September.
See how it convulses? See how it pinches? It does that because what holds this building up. By the way, it was an extremely overbuilt building. It was built to house the emergency center. It was built to house an emergency stash of fucking diesel fuel. And it drops at free fall acceleration. Not near, not something close to free fall acceleration, which means nothing got in the way of this thing falling. Not even so much as a desk.
11th.
And it dropped perfectly into itself. Now, what's that got to do with this, Scott? Everything. Because if you believe it was all because of 19 angry Muslims, then that is part of it. That happened 8 hours after they were dead. Did they have a really long Acme fuse a la Wile E. Coyote? Did they light it and then hop on planes all across the fucking country and get there? No, that didn't happen. Someone demoed that building, though, and they did it in a very precise manner, which means it wasn't some jackleg job done. Oh my God, we've got to take the building down. It's damaged. And they rushed in there with 2 fucking hand grenades and took out that building. That building was done professionally, which involves computers, design, engineers, science, math. Unless you want to tell me that they had a bunch of angry Muslims pushing buttons and no one noticed, 8 hours after the event. Then, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the date, September 11th, wasn't picked by 19 angry Muslims or some guy living in a cave. The date wasn't picked by Muslims. But it was picked for a reason. There's an interesting article on these guys. The Knights Hospitaller. I'm probably mispronouncing that. They started off at about 1099 AD. They were the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. And they were there to make sure that the hospital remained up and people taken care of, and it was protected. They were basically mercenaries in the new age of mercantilism. And they would later be used as thus. They have been around, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, for nearly 1,000 years. And some will say, well, Scott, they're just a bunch of old folks running around, doing nothing really, at meetings at the Vatican maybe. No, that's very much wrong. Here's a Foreign Policy magazine article about who are the Knights of Malta and what do they want. Some of these faces you might recognize. Let me also just stop for a second and tell you about this. Eons ago, when I was doing my original investigation into September 11th, after coming to my conclusion in 2005 and getting involved with 9/11 Blogger and Op-Ed News and publishing stuff, places like that. A place used to be called Fire Dog Lake. And of course, in 2007, I started doing it on my own website. It wasn't only demolition theory that I investigated. There's a number of things that I looked into. But one was, and it always struck me as odd, that they would have picked a Tuesday. A bright, sunny, clear, beautiful Tuesday to kick this whole thing off. And I understood that there was another September 11th that factored in, that I believe factored in. And that was when they overthrew Allende in Chile and installed Pinochet. But more importantly, that's when they were able to install the first real experiment on a nationwide basis of Milton Friedman's neoliberal economic ideology, pure free market ideology. Nixon was pressured to do so with us, to make the United States the testing ground for this. And Nixon said no. Famously, he actually came out and said, we're all Keynesians now, and so he's not going to do that. However, probably the last liberal president this country's ever seen. And there's a number of reasons for that. So instead, he sent down the Chicago boys, the Milton Friedman acolytes, to dump the economic brick on the people of Chile in 1973. The coup and the junta that installed Pinochet. Who's a big fan of Pinochet, by the way? That's right. Coach Red Pill, Gonzalo Lira. The economic fucking brick that was dropped on him, structural reforms, the same basic things that the IMF forces on people, the World Bank forces on people when they take out their quote-unquote loans, or forced to. So that's what the idea I understood that the idea meant that this was an attempt. This was a message that was being sent, and they chose September 11th, 1973, I believe, on purpose, because it is a reflection back to what happened, the original September 11th date, which we're going to talk about now. And once I discovered that, I wrote about it, but of course that article is one of the many that were lost when I was purged. But let's talk about this guy for a second, this thing from Foreign Policy. This is 2011, I believe. Am I wrong? It is 2011, early 2011. Who are the Knights of Malta, and what do they want? They are a secretive religious order with a long and bloody history and unique status under international law. But that doesn't mean they run the world. I was talking to Aunt Bibi about this yesterday, and people think, not necessarily Aunt Bibi, but people think that the Knights of Malta are just this clique of old people giving secret handshakes and sitting around every third fucking Thursday of the month and sipping on old fucking whiskey and telling stupid fucking lies to each other. That's not true. And you'll understand that in a second. Have a listen. In a speech in Doha on Monday, veteran New York journalist Seymour Hersh alleged that U.S. Military Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, had been infiltrated by Christian fanatics who see themselves as modern-day crusaders and aim to change mosques into cathedrals. In particular, he alleged that former JSOC General Stanley McChrystal, later U.S. commander in Afghanistan, and his successor, Vice Admiral William McRaven, as well as many other senior leaders of the command are, quote, all members of, or at least supporters of, the Knights of Malta. So what was he talking about? McChrystal was sacrificed. He was eliminated. He got in the way. He wasn't following the script. So they had to remove him. This guy, obviously, I'm not a huge fan of the work of Seymour Hersh. He's done some really controlled opposition bullshit. But he does touch on something that is, and was at the time, very interesting. Another controlled opposition asset did another article about this around that time. And of course that would be, what's his face? Jeremy Scahill. But Jeremy Scahill, though he does at times do controlled opposition, back in the day he did pretty good research. And he was simply reporting on not necessarily what he had come up with, but what many inside the 9/11 truth community had come up with. Let me read this for you for a second. Again, this goes to the idea that this is just some old boys club and they sit around and they drink fucking 30-year-old scotch and smoke Cubanos and tell each other lies. Listen to this. Despite having no fixed territory besides its headquarters building in Rome, the order is considered a sovereign entity under international law. It prints its own postage stamps and coins, though these are mostly for novelty value, but not necessarily, and enjoy observer status in the United Nations, which classifies it as a non-state entity like the Red Cross. The Knights maintain diplomatic relations with 104 countries. The order does not have official relations with the United States, though it has offices in New York for the United Nations delegation and Washington for its representation at the Inter-American Development Bank. Because of its secretive proceedings, unique political status, and association with the Crusades, the order has been a popular target for conspiracy theorists. Alleged members have included former CIA directors William Casey, I think that means John McCain, or maybe John McCone is a former CIA director, Chrysler chairman Lee Iacocca, and GOP fixture Pat Buchanan, though none have ever acknowledged membership. Various theories have tied the Knights to crimes, including the Kennedy assassination and spreading of AIDS virus through its clinics in Africa. In 2006, an article in the United Arab Emirates claimed that the Knights were directly influencing U.S. policy in Iraq and Afghanistan, reprising their role in the Crusades. Following the article, Islamist websites in Egypt urged followers to attack the order's embassy in Cairo, forcing the organization to issue a statement denying any military role. To be fair, the Knights have been involved in their fair share of political intrigues. In 1988, the charge d'affaires of the order's embassy in Havana confessed to being a double agent, reporting to both the CIA and Cuban intelligence. According to journalist Jeremy Scahill's book Blackwater, Joseph Shimitz, a former executive at the company who also served as Inspector General for U.S. Department of Defense, boasted of his membership in the Knights in his official biography. The defense contractor now known as Xi, chief executive Eric Prince, reportedly espoused Christian supremacist beliefs, and its contractors in Iraq used codes and insignia based on the order's medieval compatriots, the Knights of the Templar. However, there's no evidence to suggest the Knights of Malta had any direct influence over the company. So while the group is, for the most part, a charitable organization with little resemblance to the sinister portrait painted by its detractors, an image makeover might be in order as it finishes off its 10th century. End quote. Back then, and I know most of you are younger and you weren't either that aware geopolitically or even in 9/11 and the lore that was developing. But back then there was a lot of concern, a lot of attention being paid to Knights of Malta, and with good reason. The coins they talk about minting, they're not trinkets. They used to pass them to each other in handshakes so others couldn't see. Kind of an acknowledgement from one knight to another. Special club that they belong to. They have been around for going on a millennium. And I guess in some capacity, they started before 1099. They were officially named that in 1099. I don't think they put out an ad in the paper looking for dudes. So it's entirely possible they've been around in one fashion or another since for 4,000 years. They are well placed within our military. They are still well placed within our intelligence agencies. They got a little and politics. They got a little bit of attention, and probably more importantly, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Business. Because remember, back in the day, what the Knights of Malta really fucking served was the merchant class and the developing economic model known as mercantilism, which ends up being the great-great-great-grandpappy of free market ideology, neoliberal free market ideology. Let's talk about the significance. Now, that's just so you know where we are today. The Knights of Malta have been around. They were being investigated. They were being looked at by people better than Jeremy Scahill, better than Seymour Hersh. And there's plenty of stuff out there for you can look up in terms of their the people who were around 9/11 being Knights of Malta. Why September 11th? What you're looking at is the Great Siege of Malta. The Great Siege of Malta took place, started May of 1565. And it had a number of players involved. However, the most important were the Knights of Malta, who took on that name after they had to move to Malta because they were routed and sent off, and they made their way back to Malta. They made their way to Malta, and that is where they stayed. Notice this city up here. Notice the color of the city. That will come in, that will be important in a few minutes. Notice the boats. The Great Siege of Malta. It was about a 4-month long engagement between the Turks of Suleiman the Magnificent, and of course the various players who opposed them back in the day. If you look at this is the Ottoman Empire. This is ends of 1683, at the height of their powers. 1565, this area here. So everything, all the dark green, all the black, all the dark green, all the green, and this olive color. The only things that were expanded, the only part was expanded of the Ottoman Empire from 1566 to 1683 were these on the fringes. Here, and here, and here. Okay? But as you can see, this was the Ottoman Empire at its height. From Algiers, Constantinople, they had control of everything from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. They had control of all of it. These are the top 4 reasons September 11th is significant to Islam. And this was published by 1 Peter 5 back in 2016 on September 11th. The first one they note, there are 4 dates that are important to September 11th for the Muslims. I would argue that they are more important to the Christians and the business class. But let's start with the Great Siege of Malta. The Great Siege of Malta started again in May of 1565. It ended September 11th. Why is that important? Because, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, these people wouldn't exist were it not for September 11th, 1565. You can look up the Great Siege of Malta, or, if you prefer, you can simply watch, or buy the books entitled Lord of the Rings. Because if you don't know what Lord of the Rings is about, here's the real personified bad guy in Lord of the Rings. That is Saruman. Who was the opposition? Who opposed the Knights of Malta? Who was it that was responsible for that Ottoman Empire at the time? A man by the name of Suleiman. Where did the great battle take place? Where did the great battle take place? It took place in the book in Gondor. What was Gondor known as? The White City. And it was on a bay. And this is the siege of Gondor. By who? The dark forces, the orcs. The dark forces that were going to take the whole of Middle-earth and turn out the sun under their dark, evil rule. Saruman? Suleiman. That is the White City. This is Malta. Gondor is known as the White City. There it is. The orcs are the Ottoman Empire in Lord of the Rings. It's that simple. It's not terribly difficult to understand. The characters? There were several characters in this story that are interesting, of course. That's Gondor. I don't want to show you Gondor. God damn it. Well, hang on a second. I'm not prepared for class. Here we go. Let's go to the images, and we'll just look at the people involved. Obviously, they're all white. People of Middle-earth. Spaniards? Perhaps the elves or the Nordics. Of course, these represented, the hobbits represented United Kingdom, British, England, in their lifestyles, and the fact that they were smaller, less powerful than the battling, than the warring factions that were involved. But they played a pivotal role, according to Lord of the Rings. And of course, J.R.R. Tolkien is, of course, British. But if you look at their lifestyles, you can tell that that's what this is modeled after. That's what they are modeled after, especially back in those days. Here are the ones that are interesting. These two gentlemen here. Of course, we have a wizard. But these two gentlemen here, the kingdom of men, what would they be? Well, the siege took place in the White City. The White City in Gondor, but also the White City in Malta. And who were the knights that defended the great city from that Ottoman horde, or the orc horde? Ottoman, orc, get it? Were the Knights of Malta, who, by the way, look very similar to the individuals that we just saw. So that's who they are. That's who they are. They are the Knights of Malta. I know this might seem like a stretch to people. However, he's simply retelling. He didn't come up with this great fucking story of conquest, of fighting off the evil of all of these nations coming together, and then the great siege at the end with this massive battle. And then they think that they're about to fucking die, and all hope is lost, and they're gallantly out there. And then what comes over the hill? The Allies come over the hill, and they sweep in, and they wipe them out. They were this close to losing. This close to losing. And Saruman and Suleiman and the orcs and the Ottomans would have taken over the whole of Europe, the whole of Middle Earth, and turned out the lights on Christianity and mercantilism forever. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen because what happened September 11th, 1965? They were losing. Let me read a little bit of this for you. This again is from 1 Peter 5, written in 2016. At dawn on May 18th, 1565, one of the largest armadas ever assembled appeared off the Mediterranean island of Malta. Its 200 ships had been sent by Suleiman the Magnificent, Solomon the White, Sultan of the vast Ottoman Empire, to destroy the Knights of Malta, who had long been a thorn in his side. Aboard were crammed some 40,000 fighting men, including 6,000 of Suleiman's elite infantry, the Janissaries. Now let me stop for a second. There were elites created by Saruman. He built the fucking armies. And he had these elite soldiers that had those white fucking handprints on their heads. Not to mention another 9,000 cavalry, 70 huge siege cannons, one or two of which were capable of hurling 600-pound stones a mile and a half. Opposing this force were just 600 knights, a few thousand mercenaries, and a few thousand Maltese irregulars, all in between 6,000 and 9,000. Once Malta fell, which Suleiman commanders thought would take a week, the Turks would evict the Spanish from Tunis and then invade Sicily and Italy. And that, boys and girls, would have been the end. A hot and fetid June night on a small Mediterranean island in Malta, Christian sentry walking at the foot of the fort of the Grand Harbor had spotted something drifting in the water. The alarm was raised. More of these strange objects drifted into view, and men waded into the shallows to drag them to the shore. What they found horrified even these battle-weary veterans. Wooden crosses pushed out by the enemy to float in the harbor, and crucified on each was the headless body of a Christian knight. This was psychological warfare at its most brutal. A message sent by Turkish Muslim commander whose invading army had just vanquished a small outpost of Fort St. Elmo. St. Elmo's fire. It's a film that was made years ago. 1,000 yards distance across the water. Okay, so you have what is, of course, the most brutal of combat. And for the 4 months, they held out as long as they could. But then, the last battle was on September 11th, 1965, as a small army from Sicily joined the Maltese Knights and routed the remaining Turks, and the Turks suffered already great casualties. And so of the 40,000 Turks that had set sail from Constantinople, only 10,000 made it home. They had left 30,000 dead in Malta. And the Knights of St. John won the day. Not only did they win the day, but they survived. And on that day, September 11th, 1565, is when they were joined by the outside force. In the film, Lord of the Rings, that would be when over the fucking hill came the additional troops, finally joining in the fight to save all humanity from the dark hordes of the orcs, Ottomans, and they wiped out and won. And of course, there was sunshine and happiness and Christianity in the Middle Earth. The Middle Earth. The Middle Earth. otherwise known as the pivot area. Now, I've talked about this before. This is something that, if you've read the Grand Chessboard, and this is by Zygmunt Brzezinski, and this was published back in 1990-something, seven. And this is his idea that really was the foundation for the project for the new American century, rebuilding America's defenses. The idea here of the United States needed to assert global preeminence. It needed to do so by taking control of what was called, well, the Heartland Theory, or what was called the World Island at the time. The Heartland Theory comes from Mackinder, Halford Mackinder, and this is the Heartland Theory, the World Island and the Heartland. According to Mackinder, the Earth's land surface was divisible into the World Island, comprising the interlinked continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa, Afro-Eurasia. This was the largest, most populous, and richest of all possible land combinations. This is the World Island in here. Then you have outer bands. The offshore islands are the British Isles and the Isles of Japan, of course, and the outlying islands, the continents of North America, South America, and Oceania. But the point here is, and he wrote this in 1919. Of course, this is an old fight, boys and girls. It goes back to 1565. In 1919, Mackinder summarized his theory thus: who rules East Europe commands the heartland. Who rules the heartland commands the world island. And who rules the world island commands the world. If you command this area, then you can rule the world. What area is that? What area did we kick off the war against? What area did we kick off the war against? The Middle East. And we have continued to do so ever since. If you were around in those days, it was, there was shock, there was awe here. That was done to us. The media, now you can't, oh my God, you put something on YouTube and it shows somebody suggesting somebody died. The media, every single channel was just showing repeatedly over and over again planes crashing into buildings, buildings on fire, people jumping out of buildings, and then the buildings coming down. They didn't show Building 7 very often, and then they didn't show Building 7 at all. But they showed that over and over and over and over and over again. And people who lost family members that day, they complained. They actually, there's reports of them contacting their local fucking, what are you doing? Why the fuck are you doing this? Don't you care? Those are people who are dying in those. And my people, they didn't care. They didn't stop. They just kept doing it over and over. Shock and awe. Reduce the population to that level of an infant so that they'll look up at any authority figure as a parent with no questions as to what they are told to believe and what they are told must be done. That is what they did. And the hatred toward Saruman, the magnificent, the white, the hatred towards Muslims was palpable. You could taste it. It was in the air. It was horrible. And this lasted for quite a long time, and it was the foundation of a number of bills, which are now laws, starting with the Patriot Act, even though the Patriot Act had been written long before, but that was the motivation behind them passing it and agreeing to it. And of course, giving authorization to go after the Taliban when the Taliban had nothing to do with it. And Al-Qaeda and any of their associated forces when Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with it. Unless, of course, you believe that somehow a bunch of angry Muslims got in and rigged both the Twin Towers and Building 7. And were also somehow able to get all of the fucking fighter jets who patrol the skies in the Northeast Corridor from just such an event to go up to Canada and engage in some military games and not be around to respond when they were necessary on that very day. Now, that's a lot for angry Muslims living in caves to do. Also to suspend the laws of physics for a day, I guess. That's an awful lot. Maybe Saruman can do that. Maybe Sauron can do that with his big eye. But I'm guessing not. What is the meaning then? Is it because the Knights of Malta hate Muslims? No, absolutely not. But it is part and parcel of the project for the new American century, which needed a new Pearl Harbor event to begin. And they got the new Pearl Harbor event. The idea here was to take and control and capture the world island. To take it, to hold it, and then from there to spread their control throughout the world. He who rules the world island commands the world. All of our fucking attacks took place. All of our fucking anti-fucking 9/11, fighting the terrorists, it all took place in that area. All of it. Not just Bush, but also Obama. Also Trump. It all took place in that area. There is a bit of good news to this story. And that is this. The reason we now have a new tactic to dominate the world and control the world is because the first one failed. They failed. Now, I used to call King of the what? The Witch King of Admar? What is it? Witch King of... one of the wraiths, the ring wraiths. I used to call, who was the CIA director at the time? That's what I used to call that fucking evil piece of shit. Anyway, John something. I kept getting so old. Here's the thing. If you look at Lord of the Rings, for I think what he was just retelling that story. But he was retelling that story in this way for young, adolescent, primarily white males could read it and understand it and follow it and relish in the hope, in the threat, in the combat, in the opposing of the coming of the darkness and the evil that was in the orcs, the Ottomans, and Solomon, right? You understand? That's how he retold the story. That's how he meant it. You can say that's more than a little racist, and you wouldn't be wrong, but he's also just telling a historical story from his perspective. Now, here we are all these years later, and we see where that front in this war to dominate the world was thwarted. It was beaten. Just like in The Lord of the Rings, Sauron was defeated. Saruman was defeated. And, of course, there was happiness and joy throughout the fucking Middle Earth. Well, today we look back and say the Knights of Malta were defeated in their attempt to bring their darkness to the whole of Middle Earth and to the whole of the planet. You control the Middle Earth, you control the world island, you control the world. They lost. Sauron. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings guy. I read all the three of them and The Hobbit when I was a kid, and then, of course, watched the films, but they lost. They had the roles reversed. Does that make sense? They lost, and that is good news. The bad news is, just like evil never gives up, they now have a new attempt, a new way to try to retake what they've lost. Anyway, there were 3 other dates, all dealing with Muslim losses that took place on September 11th. Either losses from Spain, they'd already lost in Spain, and in September 11th, 1609, somebody signed a decree to put all the Muslims on boats and just kick them out into the fucking wilderness someplace. That was a battle of Zenta, which took place in 1697 on September 11th, in which it was pretty much the turning point of the and pretty much the end of the Ottoman Empire. And that was a big battle that took place then. But the biggest one, I believe, and the most important one to our understanding of what happened on September 11th was the Knights of Malta snatched victory from defeat. They snatched victory from defeat, and they were able to eventually, 150 years later, 100 years later, push back the Ottoman Empire and expand their own system, the mercantile system. It wasn't about Jesus, it wasn't about Christianity, it wasn't about Muhammad. It was about control of the known world. Who was going to control it? How was it going to be run? And on September 11th, 1565, a small group who had been holding out against the evil hordes of the Ottomans, the orcs, the Ottomans, were saved. And they defeated Suleiman's advances and Suleiman's armies. And that was a turning point. It's my opinion that same turning point was set off on September 11th, 2001. It gave them the ability to wage war without any question, anywhere in the world island, against any of these individuals they called terrorists who simply opposed us taking over their fucking country or dictating who ran their country for our benefit, for our interests. That's why I think they chose September 11th. Yes, there are still Knights of Malta. Yes, I'm sure some Knights of Malta were involved in that. But the purpose, the point of the whole thing was to send a message. Send a message to those who would understand it, who would read it, who would know what it meant. Of course, most people in the United States, 99.999%, wouldn't. And of course, I didn't when it first happened. But in Muslim worlds, with Muslim leaders, with clerics, with academics, of course they would understand the significance of that. It was a great defeat at the siege of Malta. And the message was, more's coming. Now that's why I believe they chose September 11th. They have a long history of that. These are folks who were around then. They are still around now. They are still in our system. For a brief period of time, they were getting attention. They don't like attention. And they're the kinds of folks who have the ability to say, we're going to stop that. You're not going to do that anymore. And I believe they did. But they are still around. They are still powerful. But that's the date. That's September 11th, 2001. And why I think it was chosen. I thank you guys for your time. As I told you before, at the beginning of this, if you're still around, thank you. I told you before at the beginning, there'll be some changes coming in the next day, maybe, hopefully, 2 days, 3 days at most. Take care, guys.